Dear Paul, well, here I am again. I just can't seem to stop writing to you. I'll try to keep this one as normal as possible so you won't get scared. So how is work? I've been enjoying mine quite a bit lately. An elderly poet friend of mine from Berkeley came out Monday early, and we spent the entire day and evening sharing our gifts with each other. Well, actually, I had the floor most of the time. That was his express purpose in coming out, to see and hear the results of my muse. It was wonderful. Things I was saying and singing would remind him of a poem he had written, so he would read it, and then I would go back to my message, and on and on. We did take time to go out to dinner. We really hadn't known each other that well. We met a couple of years ago when we both did a radio show in San Francisco. And then we met again when we were both performing at the Berkeley Mature Poets meeting. And we were both impressed with each other. He's 75. He's had quite a life, too. He was teaching at the San Francisco College of Fine Arts or some such place during the McCarthy era, and because of his concerns about the state of the world, i.e. government, he was fired and blacklisted from teaching ever again. He had a PhD, I believe. So this brilliant guy worked in a factory as a carpenter, sold real estate. I don't know how long he's been writing poetry. I think his first published book was of the poetry of convicts. I think he published it himself. Anyway, it was wonderful being with someone else who creates and has a vision of how life ought to be. I think age has something to do with our both recognizing the pain of our world and how very much it needs to be changed. Now, Paul, I'm going to change the subject. I hope you don't get blown away. I write like I talk, understand? If I was saying this stuff to you and then switched the subject and the mood, you would think nothing of it, right? Well, I am doing it in writing, understand? Have you ever read Salinger, the writer? Well, he and I kind of write alike. Pretend you're reading Salinger while you read this. Can you do that? Well, that's all I feel like writing right now. And if you come up to me again and tell me you think I'm crazy, I'm going to be more than a little angry. Janie. P.S. And generally, when I send someone a copy of a letter I've written to Ed, it's because there might be something in the letter that is applicable to them. And R.V. the poet and I did some wonderful cuddling together, too. I could trust him not to get fresh with me. I have a few more things to say to you, Paul Guerin. You are a punk kid in comparison to me. I have studied with Stephen Levine, Buddhist meditator and writer of many books on death and dying. He works a lot with cancer patients and people with AIDS. And those workshops had several people in them dying of cancer. We were dealing with the real stuff, talking about it, sharing, grieving together. And I have meditated with Christopher Titmuss, Buddhist teacher from England, sitting for 10 days at a time. No eye contact, no talking. For several years I did that. And he talked about the earth and how we might preserve it. Those were all very meaningful and feeling-filled for me. I studied a year with a psychiatrist in Iowa City, meeting for 3 and 4 hours straight, once a week, just he and I, for a year. He was my teacher of how the mind works, how the personality works, searching through my own past, seeing where my beliefs came from, seeing how I had been conditioned. It was a very rich course for me, and it was a stepping stone into the field of therapy, which I have been in for the last 10 years. Scrutinizing myself. As well as getting my master's degree in clinical psychology. And reading profusely on the subject. And being in countless workshops, 2-week workshops, 10-day workshops, weekend workshops, where all that was going on was therapy, our own or someone else's in the group. I have studied with Dick Olney, self-acceptance training, who trains across the country. A few workshops with Virginia Satir. Had lunch with Rollo May, not that he would remember. I went to Chicago after studying with a psychiatrist in Iowa City and was in a master's program at a psychiatric hospital. We were a group of 14 who met 5 days a week, 9 to 5, for 3.5 months, doing nothing but therapy. The hotshots of the particular systems we would be studying in the Chicago area would come in and work with us for a few days. Working means one of us would be the client, working on real stuff in our lives while the rest of us watched. People worked on heart-rending things like the death of their mother or whatever would come up. And we would all be so moved by what was going on. We would all be crying. They were very touching and rich and real. And afterwards, we would all share. I then worked in the psychiatric hospital there in Des Plaines, Forest Hospital. as a social therapist. We did therapy with the inmates. I did an internship there and was on staff for about a month and a half when I decided to return to Iowa City and work with Bill, the psychiatrist, which had been the original plan. Oh, I forgot to name the various therapies we studied in Chicago. Gestalt, group process, bioenergetics, Jungian therapy, and we did pool therapy too, which meant doing work in the water, which was very conducive to bringing feelings up, which, after all, is what therapy is about. Psychodrama, too, and video therapy, and family systems therapy. I went back to Iowa City after the 7 months in Chicago and taught in Bill's course for a year and a half, teaching his self-esteem course. By now I was at odds with what he was teaching, so I did it my way in my groups. From there I came to California and started at Kennedy, getting my master's degree 3 years ago, attending many workshops, reading many books, always searching for what went wrong in the world and how it might be healed. The first paper I handed in at Kennedy was handed back with a comment that it was the quality of a doctoral paper. I was in the upper echelon of my class, and my final paper so moved the president of the university when I read it to him that he wept. It was a final exam paper. We didn't have orals. It was all written. I want to add that I was also in nurses training while I was married to my second husband and was a straight A student. And I've also been a realtor and negotiated hundreds of thousands of dollars of real estate in my other life. And I have worked with a number of clients, a couple of women for 2.5 years, co-led a women's group, and was in therapy out here for probably 4 years with the same woman, Susan, and did a year training, Reichian work, with her husband, David, who I had a short-lived relationship with before he and Susan got together. That was a little ticklish, don't you think? Having your very own therapist take up with the guy you've just broken up with. And of course I had complained a lot about him in therapy to her. Well, I'm giving you the whole story. Hope you feel like reading. Next in the drama is Ed Jackson, Reichian therapist and teacher, rather well known in the Bay Area for his Reichian work. He studied with Ida Rolfs originally. He's also a medical doctor, former teacher and therapist of my therapist, Susan. Although when I met him, he is Susan's client. Little odd, isn't it? Most clients don't turn around and become your therapist, do they? Anyway, I met him looking for a therapist for my son. Susan suggested him to me. And he was attracted to me. And so the plot thickened, with our being lovers while he was seeing my son as his client. Certainly forbidden in the code of ethics. He has led workshops at Esalen, and I went along, participating, sometimes, other times just singing, on the grounds at Esalen to the seminarians walking around, on the beautiful grounds. And he and I did some co-therapy there also. So I hope that fills in a few of the details, Paul. Not that you asked. And I am in a battle with Ed that isn't finished yet. You're hearing about it before the last chapter has been written. Understand? I heard about a woman who worked 6 years to get her mother out of the Soviet Union, writing thousands of letters. Who knows what else? It took her 6 years to accomplish it. And until the 6th year, she didn't know whether it would succeed or not. But she kept right on with it. That's determination, wouldn't you say? And what did Jim say at the table in the shop? That he had been working on his project since 1982? Well, I've been working on this project for a couple of years myself. And the point I am attempting to make is that our mothers have been unfairly accused for all the pain in the world. That in fact, it is the fathers who are to blame for what is happening in the world. After all, they are the ones doing it, aren't they? I have quite a large vision, Paul. I intend to change the world. All the things I have mentioned as my experience are a drop in the bucket compared to my experience as being a mother for the last 32 years to my very own 3 lovely children. That's where it's really at. And if you have any trouble at all in understanding this letter, I'll be most happy to read it aloud to you. And one last thing, Paul. A friend would have asked or been concerned or whatever. Rather than criticized, he might have tried to understand. And if you don't mind my saying so, your lack of education is beginning to show. And both Ram Dass and Paul Winter have told me they thought my music was beautiful. And Robert Bly said he thought my consciousness was quite evolved. Don't look for housing for me in Bolinas. I've decided to stay where I am. My friend, RV, called it paradise.